Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Debbie Vini. I am the Senior Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance, and it's my pleasure to have you with us today to talk about our 2021 federal education priorities for the Biden administration. So, um, you guys may have noticed shortly after the inauguration, the Alliance released its 2021 federal priorities for the Biden administration. And for those who didn't get a chance to see that, we are going to put that in the chat so you can link to it and see the full document, which will provide quite a bit of context and detail about the priorities that we have and the recommendations for the administration. What you'll see is that the priorities certainly, as you might expect, have strong ties to charter school issues, but they also align, we think, quite nicely with the number of administration priorities related to issues like unity, racial equity, and support for working families. So we see this as a really great opportunity to bridge charter issues with larger administration issues and to really find some common ground. We are hopeful, cautiously optimistic that we will be able to find this common ground and to work with the administration to improve public education for students in the country. So we know that we are all aligned in wanting that as a primary goal. I'm joined by three great colleagues today. And before I introduce them and get us started, I wanted to let folks know that we are going to be recording this session. So we will share afterwards. And if you've got colleagues who were not able to join today, but would like to, would see it after the fact, we'll make sure that we get that out to them. Also, we're monitoring questions in the chat function so we can see if there are any real-time clarifying questions that are happening. But we're going to go ahead and talk with our panelists. I have some questions queued up for them, and I'm certain that you guys do too, because it's a very, very juicy issue. So after we have the panelists go through and we do our first round of Q&As, I will open it up for our audience participation, and we'll try to get through all the questions today. So, got three great colleagues with us today. Christy Wolf, who is my colleague at the Alliance and heads our policy and research team, and Sunil Manushani, who is with us from the Rabin Group. And then we've got Vic Klatt, who is with us from the Penn Hill Group. So each one of them will give you a brief introduction of themselves and talk a little bit about the federal landscape from their particular perspectives. And before we get started, I've got to make sure that you guys, that I note that today is a really auspicious day. It's the confirmation hearing for Mr. Cardona, who's likely to be, if it's not happened already, confirmed as the next Secretary of Education. So I will ask if you could please, while you're doing your individual sections, please also give me your thoughts on Mr. Cardona. So Christy, why don't we kick off with you? I think Christy might be having a little bit of a mic trouble, so I'm going to give her a second to figure out her audio challenges. And while she's doing that, I will also, oh, there she is. Okay.
Hi. All right. I'm clicking share screen. All right. Everything slows down when you're in a rush in terms of clicking. Thank you for your patience. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all here today. Debbie, can you just give me a wave that you can hear me okay?
I sure can. We hear you great.
Thank you. Not talking into the black hole. So I get to do the wonky bit today and walk you all through a top level overview of our education policy priorities for this year. To Debbie's instruction to give a little color commentary on the hearing this morning. I think my initial takeaway is to be gratified that the nominee was willing to indicate his commitment to serving all students in quality schools, that he's for quality schools. I mean, obviously, he indicated a preference for neighborhood schools, but I think he did a great job overall in the hearing. I think the committee, generally speaking, was supportive, and it was a pleasant hearing to listen to, unlike a lot of the hearings that there have been lately. So I'm sure Sunil and Vic will have a good bit more to add. So I will let them do that, and I will dive into the meat and potatoes portion of our webinar today. So like I said, I'm going to give a top level overview, but I'm happy, obviously, to dive into details during the questions section. This touches on most, but not all of the things that we tee up in our policy priorities for the administration this year. So what guides our priorities? We have them divided up in 3 general buckets: increasing resources and equity for education, ensuring the equitable treatment of charter schools and any new funding this year, as well as supporting the growth of high quality charter schools. So starting off with increasing equity in education, the proposals that we've indicated support for or have placed in our document, first of all, we strongly support the president's proposal that was made prior to becoming president during the campaign to triple funding for Title I, as well as to increase funding for Title III and IDEA. We know that charter schools, as public schools, benefit from these programs the same as other public schools, and would stand to benefit significantly from these additional resources that address areas that are challenging for all public schools. In addition, we're strong supporters of additional K-12 funding in the area of COVID relief, not just for reopening schools, but also to mitigate the impact of budget cuts in the coming years and that potential impact on learning and staffing, and also to help redress the significant amount of learning loss that we all know students are facing. We also indicate our support for the administration of assessments this year, that there not be any blanket assessment waivers, just in the area of equity and knowing where best to allocate resources and ensuring that learning loss is not covered up by a lack of information, and that we have the resources and information we know to enter into the next school year as informed as possible. Additionally, for charter schools, it presents a challenge to not have this assessment data for a second year in a row. Some charter schools were already starting to see having to fend for themselves and providing information about the achievement of their students and lacking state summative assessment data. This data, while sometimes can be robust and helpful for the school, can be more subject to challenge. So there are some unique charter school related issues that touch on whether or not there are assessment waivers. In addition, we have proposals related to increasing equity in funding allocations. So we've joined with a coalition of a number of other folks supporting the idea of using Title I to incentivize a more equitable distribution of education dollars in order to address racial and socioeconomic disparities. So while the Title I formulas can be tremendously complex to tinker with and adjust and improve, if there are significant additional funds, that provides an opportunity to maybe move the ball forward in understanding and addressing some of these gaps that currently exist in funding. We also, in the name of equity, want to make sure that charter schools, regardless of their status as schools authorized by districts or as individual local educational agencies, are treated fairly. And to that end, an issue that we've been a proponent of for a number of years is requiring full transparency in Title I funding allocations. While there is transparency at the federal level and states publish what they allocate to all of the schools, what states publish are adjusted Title I allocations. And this is as wonky, I promise, as I'll get in this entire presentation, but in order for charter schools, particularly charter school LEAs, to get their funding, an adjustment needs to be made to the schools that are attending that particular charter school that would have otherwise attended a district school. So basically the numbers change. Well, the change in those numbers never go back to the Department of Education. So anytime in the future, someone wants to look at where is Title I going in terms of reaching high poverty schools. Can we do an analysis to see how well this funding is reaching high poverty schools? There's no data set that has the real money that goes out to schools right now. So this is something that we would like to see. And it also provides a level of oversight to ensure that the adjustments are actually being made and some of the protections that are in place, particularly for new and expanding charter schools, are actually being implemented. Our proposals also address the need to promote a more diverse teacher and leader workforce. Charter schools are leading the way in many places in the diversity of the teachers in their schools. And so promoting the growth of charter schools is a means of addressing and promoting a more diverse teacher leader workforce. There are also some other programs at the department that address this issue and can be used as a means of advancing a more diverse workforce. And we have some programs here on the slide: the SEED program, the Teacher Leader Incentive Program, as well as teacher quality partnerships. There were priorities during the Obama administration that the secretary had proposed that were attached to some of these programs that were since repealed. And so this is just an easy, relatively easy, without Congress way for the department to indicate its support for prioritizing diverse workforce in these programs. We also propose in our paper, and I'll touch on this here and talk more in detail later, but really empowering teachers to open and design their own schools as another means of diversifying the teacher workforce. So now I'll move on to the equitable treatment of charter schools and any new funding. Charter schools, because of how they're treated differently under different state laws. Sometimes they're school districts, sometimes they're their own local educational agency. Sometimes they're that way for one program and not for another program. So there's some unique complexities and as well as some on the ground political dynamics that often can impact how well or not well charter schools get their resources. So in terms of additional COVID relief for schools, we have a strong concern in making sure that charter schools, which typically get a third less funding, particularly in urban areas, are getting their fair share, especially in the lack of funding, their likelihood of being significantly impacted by budget cuts. These resources are particularly important. We also highlight the need for resources to close the digital divide. I mean, obviously, we've been in this pandemic for a year. The need has been in existence for a year, but it's not too late to provide these resources. Charter schools in particular, we've found are in areas of low connectivity. So this is a priority for us. We also would like to see the equitable treatment of charter schools in any infrastructure funding. They have been included as public schools in bills that have been proposed by Chairman Scott on the House side for school modernization. And so we would like to see that continue in any major infrastructure bill or stimulus that would come about this year. We would also like to make sure that charter schools are included in any local consultation requirements that are part of those pieces of legislation. We understand and support President Biden's priority for increasing resources for childcare and for pre-K programs. Charter schools have been steadily increasing their role in providing these services to students. They're across 31 states. They're now serving 45,000 students. And we would like to see, again, that charters would have a level playing field when it comes to accessing funds for these programs when any legislation moves on this. So lastly, our proposals are, last but not least, I should say, our proposals are around supporting the growth of high quality charter schools. And we continue our call and our proposal to ask the administration to also support $500 million for the charter schools program. For the last several years, the CSP has been level funded at $440 million. And as a consequence of that level funding for this next year, there will not be any new grant competitions for the CMO grant competition or the grants that go to states. All the funds are currently tied up in existing grants. And we see the need for the additional $60 million to support, in particular, the facilities funding program, which addresses significant barrier to charter schools across a number of states, as well as developing new and innovative charter school models. We also would support the administration's, we would support them asking in their budget request for flexibility to move funds in between the different programs within the CSP. So this is a little more wonky, but every year when the president submits his budget, they also submit language to congressional appropriators on how they would like to see the funds appropriated. And over the last few years, there's been a decreasing amount of flexibility to calibrate the amount of funding in the different pots to match the needs that are in the states. And so we would just ask that the administration request that flexibility. So say there's more of a need in facilities, or there's more of a need in the CMO pot one year versus the states, that there's sufficient flexibility to make sure the right amount of money is in each pot. So getting back to the idea of empowering educators to open their schools, not only as a means of promoting teacher and leader diversity, but also just to empower teachers and have more teacher and educator-led schools. We would like to see a mechanism for either using CSP funds at the state level or another authority to use pre-planning, use it for pre-planning grants to help incubate new schools, especially in places where it's a new charter law state and maybe there are teachers that have been in their schools for a number of years and they're wanting to make the transition. And these sorts of grants can help give them the support that they need to design the program that they want to implement and get a high quality charter and be able to implement it. So this is a new idea that we have for the CSP. Lastly, on the issue of supporting high quality charter schools is the issue of for-profit charter schools, or which are technically nonprofit charter schools that contract with for-profit educational service providers, but they've sort of been boiled down to being referred to as for-profit charter schools. It's only in Arizona where there can be a for-profit management company that directly holds a charter school, and these schools are already ineligible to receive CSP funds. There's only about 10% of charter schools that contract with for-profit management companies. And there's already a number of rules that are in place and guidance and that have to be followed in terms of how these contracts are set up and the arm's length distance that is required between the company and the nonprofit charter school board. However, some of these, the requirements and guidance are scattered across different types of governmental documents that have varying levels of legal impact, and none of them are particularly codified in the program regulations themselves. So I think there's definitely a clear opportunity to strengthen and clarify existing federal rules that are designed to protect against self-dealing, conflict of interest, or any of those inappropriate types of relationships. So that is our proposal on for-profit management companies. All right, I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Vic Klatt. He's going to give us a perspective on where we are with Congress, and then he'll kick it over to Sunil, and I'm going to get out of the presentation or try to.
Well, while you're doing that, Christy, I'll go ahead and get started. To give you a very quick sense of what's happening in Congress right as we speak, the short version of it is a lot. Not only is there the Cardona hearing that's going on, or I think it was just completed within the last hour or so, although I lost track of it. It may still be going on even, and my quick reaction to that, Debbie, is I think he did a really good job. I think Republicans and Democrats alike are going to be very supportive of him. He may have a couple of outlier Republicans who may oppose him for not necessarily education related reasons, but more having to do with some of the issues about Title IX and who gets to participate in athletics and things like that, but not necessarily.
That was a really interesting wrinkle that I hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, well, if you follow Senator Paul much, it's not a big shocker that came up. So there could be a few of those kinds of issues, but I think for the most part, he's going to get overwhelming support. And I think it's possible logistically that he could pass as quickly as this week in the Senate. Although that'd be a pretty fast timeline. And if he doesn't pass this week, impeachment is next week in the Senate, so I don't think much will happen then. So it may be he'll have to wait a couple of more weeks to get through the process. But either way, I think he's going to have pretty smooth sailing. And he seems like the kind of guy that is going to be welcoming to a variety of different points of view, including charters. And we'll just, when the rubber meets the road in terms of developing real policy, we'll see where it goes. But so far, I guess the way I look at it is he seems pretty good. And it, from my point of view, at least, it could have been a heck of a lot worse. So I think we're looking forward to a good working relationship with him. In terms of what's happening legislatively in Congress right now, it's all really centered around one single thing, and that's the budget. And Congress right now is focused on, this week also, passing a budget resolution in both the House and Senate that's focused on President Biden's COVID-related priorities. Without going into too much detail, I mean, the really big picture here is it could add, well, and procedurally, the way the process goes is you have to pass a budget resolution that both the House and Senate agree to, which takes a little bit. And then the budget resolution sends instructions to the committee for what's called a reconciliation bill, which many of you have probably heard about. It's the reconciliation bill that in the end of the day matters the most to us, because that's what will provide real money in going forward here with regard to COVID. The budget resolution also sets the overall parameters for the entire budget year, and will set the top line numbers for how much you can spend, both in discretionary and mandatory funds. But as soon as they figure out the budget resolution in very short order, as quickly as next week, the committees will start to mark up a reconciliation bill. What we're expecting in a reconciliation bill for education is somewhere in the neighborhood of $170 billion. That's B.
It's a lot of money.
$billion devoted to education in general. How they split it up.
Do you have any sense of what portion of that would be K-12 versus higher ed?
Well, it's not 100% clear at the moment, because it's subject to what the committees decide, and they haven't made it 100% clear, but we think it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $130 billion for K-12, because that's what President Biden had in his plan. Now, they don't have to follow the president's plan to a T, And in the end, I don't think they will exactly, but I think this $130 billion number is pretty close to what we'll get. Process-wise, so the Senate both have to agree to this reconciliation bill. It moves under an expedited procedure in the Senate. So the bottom line to that is you can pass a reconciliation bill. Unlike most other bills in Congress, you can pass a reconciliation bill with just Democratic support. And at the moment, it kind of looks like they're headed down in that direction, although there's some folks who still are hoping for a bipartisan bill a little bit later on in the process. Lots of details there, and I won't go too much into all of them, but just know this, for those of you in the real world and don't have to worry about all this inside baseball stuff in Washington. If anywhere near this amount passes, that is a ton of money that's going to be coming from the federal government. This is on the heels, I would add, of a COVID bill that just passed, I don't know, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, in the last Congress under the last president. That bill had $54 billion in it. So if you add this 130 for K-12 to the 100 or to the 54 from last time, that's over $180 billion. Now, to give you some sense of proportion here, the Title I program, which is what we're all focused on all the time in terms of policy and things like that. Title I program is about $16 billion, as is IDEA is about that size. So we're talking about more than 10 times the amount of money that could be on its way soon from the federal government for K-12 education. There are formula issues and all that kind of stuff that Christy went through. And we'll do our best to make sure charters get their fair share. But under any scenario, this is a ton of money that's on its way. In terms of what the money can be used for, it's likely to go into the same structure as was passed before, the CARES Act structure, which essentially means the bulk of the funds will largely be focused on COVID related activities, cleaning schools and PPP and a variety of things like that. But this money can also be used for educational purposes, like combating learning loss, and whatever that means at the state and local level, and tutoring and things like that. So just be ready for those of you, out in the real world. A lot of money's on the way, and it looks very much like it's going to happen. The figures may move around a little bit, but no matter what, there's a ton of money coming. I can talk more about that, but why don't I turn it over to Sunil, and then we can take questions and go from there.
Great, thank you, Vic. I want to note there's some awesome questions in the chat, and we see them. We are going to get to those, but I do want to pass over.
I'm glad you see him, because I don't know how to work this chat thing.
Well, one of the upsides and downsides of going after Christy and Vic, who know so much, is that there's much less to say. So I'll be brief. But I want to first thank the Alliance for inviting me to be with you all this afternoon, and wanted to talk a little bit more generally about sort of how an administration can affect charters. Sometimes I think there's a misunderstanding of what a federal government can and can't do. I'll try to talk a little bit about some of the personnel. Obviously, we heard about, Secretary Designate Cardona, and then maybe a couple of things to look for in the first 100 days that I think will be good sort of indicators about where this administration is going, particularly with respect to the sort of charter school world broadly construed. So in terms of the ways an administration can sort of affect your work, for me, the number one thing is the bully pulpit. And we've seen that just in the last administration, sort of whatever Betsy DeVos said got so much coverage, and it really sort of pushed the narrative, either pro or con, on a particular area. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what, hopefully Secretary Cardona will be talking about when he's asked about charters and ed reform more generally. At his hearing today, as you heard, he was he gave what would, I assume, be an answer that his handlers wanted him to say, which is he's for all quality. He's for all schools that need to be of high quality, and try not to get into the weeds of, one particular type or another. He did shout out a particular charter school. He said he knows about great charter schools. So I thought that was positive. But he tried to seemingly draw a distinction between charters and neighborhood schools, at least an implicit distinction. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. But the bully pulpit. So what his speeches are going to say, what he says in response to reporter questions, that sort of thing. I mean, obviously the president will be speaking on education issues, but I'm guessing he's going to, not be getting into the weeds of, Title I policy or anything like that. The second area in which administrations, I think, have a really big impact is on sort of the rules and regulations that they push forward while they're there. I mean, the most obvious ones are sort of how they handle the charter school program. What are the invitational priorities they put? What are the reporting requirements that they require? What other bells and whistles or lack of bells and whistles do they put on their competitive grant programs? What are they saying with respect to COVID money? What guidance are they giving? Is it as broad as you would hope it to be, or is it, somehow channeled in a particular way? And then I wouldn't also forget the Office for Civil Rights. They are primarily enforcement driven. In other words, they get a complaint and they investigate, but there's still a lot on the policy side that office could do vis-a-vis charters. And so I think that will be an interesting place to watch as well. And then the third area is the president's budget request and what the president says or doesn't say about particular line items in the budget. It's interesting, Vic had, talked about the order of magnitude that the COVID relief money is going to be vis-a-vis sort of general funding. But ironically, the president's budget request, which is, hopefully going to come out in a few months for FY22, is going to have a lot more detail explaining what they're going to fight for and what they're not going to fight for. And again, I think that'll be pretty telling to see where this administration is headed. So, to give you an example, last year in Trump's last budget request, he proposed zeroing out the charter school program. And you're like, what? Why did he do that? Well, he wanted to roll that and a bunch of other programs into a larger block grant program. And of course, that went nowhere on the Hill. And so I don't expect to see this president proposing to zero out the charter school program and block grant everything. But what he does or does not say about particular line items in the budget will be particularly instructive. And might have a little bit more sway in this Congress, given that there's Democrats controlling the House and Senate than it was in the last Congress, where you had the House and the president of different parties. In terms of personnel, moving to that for a minute, I think it's pretty clear that the administration or the transition team in particular worked really, really hard to find someone who would offend nobody. And it was a real task and a success story as far as I'm concerned, if that in fact was their goal. And I had to think it was, that Commissioner Cardona wouldn't be sort of placed in a particular education camp. And it has been shocking to me that usually right before a nomination comes out, or before a nomination hearing, confirmation hearing, some negative articles start coming out about the person, what they did when they were in high school, or they blew someone off who had a complaint or whatever. But I really didn't read anything about him. And that's a testament to the vetting that the administration did and to himself. And so as Vic and Christy indicated, I don't anticipate any problems in him getting confirmed. People have until tomorrow to get questions into senators on the help committee, so that if they want to put questions to Dr. Cardona in writing, they can do so. But again, I don't anticipate any real issues there. The only other nominee who has been named, at least Senate confirmed nominee so far in the Department of Education, is Cindy Martin, who I think many of you have heard of, but again, she's a superintendent at San Diego Unified. She had a really good reputation for increasing graduation rates, for closing achievement gaps. But unlike Secretary Designate Cardona, there have been some negative articles that have come out about her. And so we'll see what that means in terms of a confirmation process. My guess is it probably won't amount to much, but she will have some questions to answer about concerns raised by the San Diego NAACP about why she didn't do enough to close discipline gaps between African-American students and white students. And there has been some concerns mentioned in the charter school sector about sort of the role she took on when she was on a particular commission that Governor Newsom put together to try to bring the charter school world and the unions together. This was back in 2019. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. And again, she was nominated to be deputy secretary. Now, there's certainly a whole bunch of other positions that are important and will affect, your world, and that includes like the assistant secretary for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is the office that runs the charter school program. There is the assistant secretary for civil rights. I sort of referred to that before. And then there's a really obscure office in the Department of Education called the Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development. But it's a small office, but in many ways part of the brain trust of the Department of Education in terms of what policy comes out. So who is going to be heading up that office, I think will be instructive as well. And then I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what I think many people think, which is that Dr. Jill Biden will probably have an outsized role in sort of the education policy and programs of this administration, given her role as a lifelong educator. And I think it was pretty instructive on literally the first day that she was in office. In other words, like that Thursday after Inauguration Day, she met with Secretary-Designate Cardona. She had the two teachers unions presidents over to the White House for a meeting. And she had a massive, I'm saying Zoom call, and probably with some other platform, for 11,000 educators. And this was on day one. So I think it's also telling that presumably Dr. Cardona's chief of staff, or whoever is going to be the Secretary of Education, their chief of staff used to work for Dr. Biden. So I think the connection is actually pretty obvious. And then two other people I mentioned really quickly in the White House, working for the Domestic Policy Council, which again is one of the brain trusts that sort of drive a lot of the policy work, are Department of Education veterans who know their way around the block, so to speak. Catherine Lehman, who used to be the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at OCR, Department of Ed, and Carmel Martin, who was the head of this small office that I mentioned, OPEPD, back in the Obama administration, and it's had a number of policy roles all along the way. So they'll be important in this mix moving forward. One last point, and that is, what to look out for in the first 100 days, one of which I just mentioned, which is, what does the president's budget say with respect to the charter school program? And it's not, the money piece is important for sure, but I think equally important is what are the sort of statements justifying the dollar figure. What is it? What is he saying on Title I or other places? Does that have any impact on charters? Again, it might not get put into law in the appropriations process, but again, that'll give you a good indicator of where they view the charter school world. As I also indicated before, these nominees will be filling out questions, answers to questions that are given by senators. So there might be something there that is worth exploring further once you read them. I would also be looking at, what guidance is the department giving out with respect to the use of COVID money. I think that'll be important. And then also obviously tracking the other political appointees. There's about 150 political appointees or so in the Department of Education when it gets fully staffed up, give or take a few. And so, are those folks, do they sort of defy being in a particular education camp, kind of like Cardona does? Or, is it a bunch of union folks? Is it a bunch of ed reform folks, somewhere in between? I think that will be interesting as well. And one final issue I think will also be definitely worth watching, and it came up at least 3 times in the hearing today, and that is, what is he going to do on requests for waivers on spring testing, and what does that mean for accountability? Again, he was pretty non-committal about it, but again, talked about the importance of having data to identify learning loss and other gaps. So we'll see where he goes with that, but again, an important indicator of where this administration will be going more broadly. So yeah, let me stop there, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Sunil, and Vic, and Christy. So I am actually going to scrap the questions that I had set up for you because I want to be responsive to the folks who are joining us on this webinar. I'm going to actually prioritize their questions. We've got about 16 minutes left, so I'm going to ask if you guys can, as tightly as you can, respond so we can try to get through as many of these as possible. So Christy, I'm going to start with you. We've got a question coming in from Brian Reich, and he's asking, what's the prospect that any of these things that we're talking about in our education priorities are actually going to be taken up by the Congress or the White House, given all that's going on right now with COVID-19 responses and school reopenings? And that's actually kind of similar to the question that I was going to ask you, which is, given all the stuff that the administration has to focus on right now, what do you think would be the one or two biggest priorities that they would be focused on right now?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I appreciate this question, and it gives me an opportunity as well to underscore that this paper that we've done is highly tempered by realistic expectations and also our desire to support the President Biden's and his administration's priorities. So this is not just like, what's the charter school wish list? Because that would have looked very different if we weren't trying to connect things to reality. There's a number of things in the paper that don't require Congress. There are things that the department can do administratively. I touched on some of the things that Sunil just went over. So we try to target some of these proposals related to the ease of the administration acting unilaterally and not requesting Congress to do anything. So I think that in terms of what we're asking for, what we see to be hopefully most likely, I would hope that the treating charters fairly in any new funding, equitable treatment of charters. I think that's going to be our first issue, is going to be potentially the first issue that we're going to ask you all to engage in. If there is a bill where this is an open question or is not addressed, we will want to engage all of you to make it clear to your members of Congress that charters do need to be treated fairly, whether it's in COVID aid, stimulus, infrastructure. So those are things that we see coming out of the gate first, and maybe Vic can talk a little bit more on that. But I think some of the shinier toys in our proposals, like focusing on empowering educators to open schools, that is certainly, we think, aligned to the president's stated priority to first have a former educator as Secretary of Education. The sort of obvious connections to unions and teachers and wanting to empower them, empowering teachers to have their own schools seems to be a good mechanism. So that's the lens that we're looking through all of these things. This is not, we wouldn't even give the same list to our champions in Congress. This is a very administration focused list.
Thank you for that, Christy. Vic, I'm going to pop over to you. There's a couple of questions coming from Carrie Talcott out in California, which is about student funding for virtual schools. So, online charter schools have seen tremendous enrollment spikes this year due to COVID. And her question is specifically whether there might be caps on per pupil allocation for online charter schools, whether we think that's a real thing.
I think that's much more a function of state policy as opposed to federal policy. To me, the whatever happens in the COVID package, the money's going to go out exactly as before. If caps exist now on that money, there'll be caps going forward. But at the federal level, I don't know, I'd be kind of surprised if there's anything overtly done in an appropriations bill, and it can't be done really in a reconciliation bill, capping online schools. And I don't necessarily see the department doing much. I don't know, Christy, do you have anything more on that, though? You may know this issue better than me.
Well, I think the broader issue is whether or not states will continue to put the brakes on the expansion of any kind of charter school, but they do seem to have been focused on virtual charter schools. I think we were certainly more concerned and tried to get language in to prohibit states from keeping charter schools from expanding to accommodate additional interests. It does seem like some of the virtual pushback has been resolved at the state level. So I don't see that necessarily as an ongoing federal issue.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Great, thank you both. So there's a great question here from Sonia Park about career staff at the department and how they're just kind of decimated right now. And Sunil, I'm going to pop this one over to you. What do you think are the prospects of the Department of Ed getting back up to speed with its staffing for career staffers?
Yeah, and I was there at the beginning of the Obama administration, and so I kind of felt the same way coming in, that our career staff was decimated, but I guess I hadn't seen nothing compared to what it is now. So it's certainly a challenge, there's no doubt. And I don't think it's come as a surprise to anyone, sort of hiring in the federal government, particularly in the sort of the career echelon, is really time consuming. And so it will take a while to get the sort of machinery back up and running. But I gotta believe that's gotta be a high priority, because there's just so much to do. And if you don't have the bodies and sort of the willingness in those bodies to do it, your whole agenda is just gonna get stalled.
Thank you for that. Christy, I'm gonna pop over to you with another the questions. So this one is from an anonymous attendee, but in the Obama administration, pre-K straddled education and HHS, and it was a priority for the secretary at that time. Is there any sense that it's also going to have similar support, not just what the president is saying, but do you see any indication that the secretary might also prioritize pre-K?
I don't know if that came in the hearing. I mean, yes, it was certainly a campaign priority, and it's a priority of Chairman Murray of the Senate Help Committee. I don't know, Sunil, Verk, do you have any from either Obama, or you want to? Well, I think maybe you guys can answer that better.
Well, so I'd say this. It was also a huge priority for President Obama, and nothing much really happened in the end of the day on it. Nowhere near what he promised ended up being reality. I don't think it's been a high focus of President Biden, at least at this stage. But to me, the person to watch here is Senator Murray, the new chair of the Help Committee, as Christy was talking about. It is a high priority for her, maybe her highest priority in the education world. And to the extent that there's real movement on it, I think it will be more because she drives it rather than the administration. And with regard to the mix of education and HHS, that's been a problem for years. I mean, Head Starts at HHS, childcare block grants at HHS. There are a handful of pre-K programs at the education department. And, I think we just have to be hopeful that they figure out a way. I mean, I'm myself always of the view, whatever the issue is and whoever's in charge of the administration, sharing program administration between different cabinet agencies is a mess. It's always has been and always will be. And I'm hopeful they'll be able to figure out one or the other if they move legislation going forward.
Yeah, and during the Obama administration, one of the main programs that Ed did administer got moved over to HHS, the preschool development grants. And so really the main funding stream for early education is in disability in the Department of Education. Other than that, HHS pretty much runs it.
Yeah, I mean, there are pre-K grants now through ESSA, but yeah.
Okay, I've got another question that I want to throw out to you guys. So this is specifically about human capital. We talked about within our priorities really wanting to encourage more folk to get into education as careers, and particularly to have more educators open charter schools. So this question is about something that kind of straddles K-12 and K-12 and higher ed. What's your best guess at whether there might be some opportunities for loan forgiveness for people who want to pursue education careers within this upcoming package?
Well, there's loan forgiveness right now, or loan forbearance right now. There has been for the last I don't know, 10, 11 months, and it continues through September. I think there's a pretty good chance there'll be loan forgiveness for everybody, not just educators, but for everybody, as a result of the push from Democrats in Congress, particularly in the Senate, Senator Warren and others, as well as this was part of the president's education platform. It's not included in the reconciliation bill that's going forward, but there are many who argue that the secretary and the administration has the ability to, by administrative fiat, essentially forgive a certain amount of loans. And I think there's at least a 50-50, if not better, chance of that happening. There's also the loan forgiveness program for public servants specifically. There were a lot of problems in that program in terms of how it was administered and interpreted and things like that. A lot of that stuff got worked out at the tail end of the Trump administration, and I think that they'll continue to work out the kinks in that program going forward. And in fact, right now, even though no one has to pay back their federal loans at the moment, you're still getting credit towards that program now, even so. So I think there's a pretty good chance, real good chance, actually.
Thank you so much. We've got a couple more questions that are coming in. Christy, you look like you wanted to jump in and add something though, or did I misread your body language? Okay.
She's just figuring out how to get her loans forgiven.
Just looking again. Okay, great. So I've got a question here from Connie Spinner. She's the school leader for one of 10 adult charters in the District of Columbia. They serve as a bridge program for young adults who require upskilling and preparation for post-secondary. So the president referenced upskilling and middle skills development quite a bit. And adult charters are growing across the nation, and certainly they're needed. So she's wondering if we have articulated how we are going to, at the Alliance, get to better know about these unique charters. We say if you offer us lunch and invite us over, we'd love to know about you. But I'll pass that over to you, Christy.
Yeah, so I think DC is definitely leading the way in the flexibility they have in their charter school law to serve adult students. We find a lot of interest among members of Congress when we're on the Hill in these alternate ways that charter schools can serve overage students, undercredited students. And I think that we're looking to update the information that we have on that this year. We have somewhat a dated paper, and we don't specifically address the rise of some of these adult charters in the district. So I'm really grateful, Connie, that you flag this and make sure that we address this in the information that we provide to people on the Hill and our future research. Thank you.
And if I could add one other real quick thing, there are a number of proposals floating around both Congress and the administration right now dealing with workforce development. And it seems like I'm not entirely familiar with the details of how the DC programs run, but it seems like it'd be worth taking a look at those proposals as they go forward to see to what extent you can get involved in that legislative initiative as well, that set of initiatives.
Sunil, I'm going to throw this one over to you. I know that you are a fan of accountability, as a number of us are in the space. So we've got a question from Sam Duell. If Secretary Cardona emphasizes quality schools, do you think that means he will be supportive of measuring quality, like with assessments? So I'll toss that one over to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the, is quality in the eye of the beholder, or is there some general metric that we're relying on, right? So I think in the hearing, he kind of said it was sort of going to be a case by case, in other words, state by state basis. I don't think he will do a blanket waiver, if I had to guess. But yeah, you need to have some baseline level of data to know what is going on in the school and to target interventions. And so, absent some sort of standard objective baseline, I don't know how you do it. Everyone talks about multiple measures and everything like that, and I fully agree with that. But at the end of the day, if there's going to be these blanket waivers, you're going to have 2 years of no data on how particular subgroups are doing, and so what do you do with that? So yeah, I think whether it comes to in terms of how schools are identified for improvement and things like that, that gets much more complicated. But at least doing the assessments and, hopefully, using the assessment results to help generate, if there's any remedial instruction or other things necessary, at least hopefully we're going to agree on that.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Vic. Thank you, Christy. We are at time. We unfortunately have a couple of questions that we did not get to. A couple of them are related to the charter schools program specifically and what funding opportunities might look like for that for states going forward. We didn't have time to get to the answers to all of those today, but how funny you should ask, because it is time that we are moving into appropriation cycle. And so I'm certain that we will be back in touch with you with a great deal more information about that, what the numbers look like and opportunities, and how we can actually use your support to shore up and support the charter schools program going forward. Thank you guys for joining us today. It was a lively discussion, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.